So I'm really pleased to have both Gary Adams and Michael Downey. Gary Adams is with USDA APHIS, and this year MOA was contacted about the grasshopper spraying. It turned out to be a really interesting experience in working with Gary and providing comments. I think Gary was a little worried that we were going to try to stop the entire operation. And with the MOA membership, that's not necessarily, it was quite divided. The really good thing is that we started a relationship with APHIS, and I feel like Gary really listened to us, and I anticipate that we will have more frequent interaction when it comes to spraying. And so just as a brief introduction to Gary, he was born and raised in Montana and is a graduate of Montana State University with a degree in agronomy. And he's worked with the USDA Animal and Plant Inspection Service, or APHIS, in the plant protection and quarantine area. He's currently the state plant health director and leads a small staff with offices in Helena and Billings. So welcome, Gary, and you can take it away. And then I'll introduce you later when Gary is done, Michael.
Thank you, Jamie. Can everybody hear me? Can I see a thumbs up just to make sure? Jamie and I have been working for over a week trying to get me connected. For whatever reason, it wasn't working. And now I'm going to try to share my screen in the hopes that we can use that to move through the next 20 minutes or so. Can you see the PowerPoint? Which took me way past the beginning. All right, well, welcome everybody. It's December and we're talking about grasshoppers. I hope most of you did not experience the grasshopper issues that were felt by many this year, but as Jamie said, there's my contact information on the bottom of the screen there. I'm the state plant health director for a very small agency, and I'll explain a little bit about what we do besides grasshoppers really quick. Usually I present a lot of this information to people that are requesting grasshopper suppression, and so it takes about an hour, and I'm going to talk really fast. So please write down your questions, and we'll have a little conversation when I'm done. Part of APHIS is the plant protection and quarantine. That's the programs that I'm responsible for. And our mission really is to safeguard American agriculture and to promote trade, to make sure that we can provide enough food for everyone and to make sure that we're marketable across the ocean. So a lot of what we do is not related to native insects like grasshoppers. On the upper right is Ralstonia. It's a disease of geraniums that can affect potatoes. Asian longhorn beetle is that picture on the right. We have quarantines for fruit flies, that picture on the bottom. Just trying to eradicate things that should not be here. Cardinal bunt is a disease of wheat that we work with primarily in Arizona, trying to keep that from moving around the country so that we can market our grain, and we don't have it in Montana, thank goodness. So most of what we do, as you can see that list of things, deals with things that should not be in Montana or in the United States. Now, grasshoppers and Mormon crickets is the one anomaly on that. It's a native organism. We actually kind of want it here. But grasshoppers, Mormon crickets sometimes compete with our objectives based on sheer numbers. And our Plant Protection Act of 2000 is what gives us the authority that grasshoppers and Mormon crickets are actually the only thing in the Plant Protection Act that is specifically mentioned by name. All the rest are, if it's not supposed to be here, we got to go deal with it. But it says that we will work with grasshopper suppression, and it's based back on the Dust Bowl eras when grasshoppers basically wipe people out. What we do is conduct surveys. We provide technical assistance like this, and as Jamie alluded to, in years like last year and the previous year, there are some suppression programs that we conduct, and that's where Jamie said that they provided feedback on our environmental assessments, and we would welcome you all to do the same thing. I'm going to go really quick through here. That's just a repeat of what we just saw. Just so you know, if people aren't really familiar with grasshoppers, and we're focusing on rangeland grasshoppers, but I'll cover some of the other bases, is that a grasshopper spends most of the winter in the egg stage, which is in the ground, this part down here in the bottom left. And when they hatch, they look like a grasshopper their whole life. So they go through that incomplete metamorphosis as opposed to a butterfly going from a caterpillar to a butterfly. They look like a grasshopper their whole life stage. So each one of these 5 young life stages or nymph life stages is called an instar. If you hear to us refer to a first instar, second instar, third instar, and so forth, until they become an adult, or many of them fly and they start mating and they lay their eggs. Now this picture up on the thing that's hanging like a vampire off of the plant, that's a grasshopper crawling out of its exoskeleton, and then it gets bigger and it forms its exoskeleton again, which is important when we talk about how we manage them sometimes. So, now it's not moving forward. My slides aren't moving, Jamie. I don't know what happened. There we go. There's an egg pod. Here's the different life stages of grasshoppers. I'm going to go really quick. I just want to let you know there's a whole lot of different types of grasshoppers. Those 2 pictures are both adult grasshoppers, different species. You can see the different sizes. So size is not relative to the age class of the grasshopper. This is the bad guy that we had across the state for the most part, this lesser migratory grasshopper. It's as close to a locust as we have in the United States, but it's not a true locust, but it does move long distances. Some of these have small wings so that they don't ever grow big wings. So they look like a nymph, but they're not. Big ones, flashy, we don't care. They're just fun to watch. Males and females may not even look alike. You really want to learn how to identify them. You got to look at the end of their abdomen. There is a lucid key you can get free on your iPhone if you want, and I can let you know what that is, and you can identify grasshoppers to your heart's content. There are over 400 different species in the Western United States, but only a couple dozen are ones that we consider are damaging, and a few species are actually beneficial because they eat like things like snakeweed. Here's just a list. There's going to be a quiz at the end to get your pesticide credits. You have to memorize that. Really, it's just to show you that out of all the grasshoppers that are in Montana, only some of them are the ones that build up the populations that are competing with people priorities. This is that list, and on the bottom, of course, the marmot crickets. And I don't know if anybody's ever experienced marmot crickets, but they're kind of a different character altogether. They're actually a katydid. This thing, and I can share this in a PDF format because it's hard to read, but this says, what this list shows is what grasshoppers feed on crops and which ones feed primarily on rangeland grasses and which ones will feed on everything. And that one grasshopper, that lesser migratory grasshopper, will feed on anything and everything. So that's this bolded one here. It'll feed on anything, and that's what makes it such a big pest, plus the numbers. So we do surveys. We look for them early in the season. We figure out how far they're distributed, and if we decide to do some treatments, we try to count them beforehand and after. And then later in the summer, we'll do an adult survey to try to predict what's going to happen the following year, and I'll show you what we think is going to happen next year. This slide, just really quickly, the yellow is where different species hatch, so they don't all hatch at the same time. Species of the same species don't all hatch at the same time, and different species don't all hatch at the same time. So that's the message there. Some of them you might go in early June and not see anything, and then this species down here, this Nebraska grasshopper, will hatch later, and if you don't just keep watching, they can swarm late in the season, and then you're not ready for them. This one down here that shows the yellow off to the right, that means that they hatch late in the summer. They'll actually go through the winter not as an egg, but as a partially mature grasshopper, and then finish their maturing in the spring, and they're mating and egg laying, and then they'll hatch again in late summer. So they're a little bit different. So sometimes in the spring, when the snow's melting off, people see grasshoppers hopping around. It's probably this one or a similar species, and we don't care about those because they never build up to damaging populations. So if you ever actually want to do a survey out in the rangeland, here's what you do. You visualize a square foot, you walk towards that square foot, and you count how many grasshoppers jump out of that square foot. Think of a little square tile on your kitchen floor, and you'll do that 18 times, writing down the number each time, total them up, and divide by 2, and that gives you the number of grasshoppers per yard. So that's how we do it. So everything that we do is estimating the number of grasshoppers per yard, and that's how we determine their impact, their potential impact. Now, what does that mean? One grasshopper can eat and or destroy up to 6 times its own weight every day in vegetation. Now that means destroy means a lot of grasshoppers will just chew on the twig, and they will just let the vegetation fall to the ground, which of course adds to the organic matter, but it doesn't, if you're trying to produce forage, that does not do you a lot of good. And a lot of the alfalfa fields across Montana this year were decimated by grasshoppers, as were some grain fields. So if you're into that type of organic farming, you potentially were impacted by grasshoppers this year. Now, if we didn't have December 1st weather that was hot and dry and starting fires by browning, we might have moisture and cloudy and cold. And the more moisture and the colder it is, the more vegetation, the fewer grasshoppers. It promotes fungus and stuff that makes the grasshoppers population die back. But as we all know, we have had hot, dry, droughty weather, which we're going to hear about here in a little bit more about the drought, and that promotes large grasshopper populations. And that's what we've had the last couple of years. Is hot, dry weather has just promoted an explosion of some of these species. So they're more damaging. I want to make sure I stay within my time frame. So there's some decision software. It used to be that if there's 8 more per yard in rangeland, you might consider suppression, but 15 or more is more correct. And of course, we have different reasons. We may want to, is there anything even to save? There's people who decide not to do anything this year because it was so droughty that the grasshopper didn't even, or the grass didn't even grow. So they just decided to do nothing. They might as well just buy hay. Really, in the big scheme of things, we got to wait for Mother Nature to take care of it. But there are some things that humans can do to try to stem that tide for a year if you need to. I pulled this from MSU. Kevin Warner, if you need crop advice, Kevin Warner with MSU is the person to go to for that, and I can get you his information. But this pretty much mirrors that if in the field it's the same populations, 15 or more, you would either lose forage or you need to do something about it. And of course, they have on the field margins really high population. That's higher than what we would recommend. But anyway, my point to this really is if you got real specific questions about crop, Kevin's the guy to go to. So here's the thing that, speaking to an organic group, is interesting, but we have for PPQ alternatives. One thing is that we could do nothing. And I'm sure there's some government jokes available there, but that's true. We can do conventional rates, meaning blanket coverage at the rate that's on the pesticide level. Or what we prefer to do is reduced agent area treatments, which means we only treat every other swath and we use a lower rate on the rangeland to try to reduce cost and the actual amount of pesticide that's put into the environment. And of course, you have a zero tolerance for that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. No action, we might do it no action because there is no need. There might be environmental factors. One of those environmental factors, which we ask every landowner that are requesting our service, is there organic property next to you? And I hope that sometime between now and next summer that we can figure out a way to figure out where the organic properties are, because right now that was one of our challenges, is that there's no database or anything. We actually had organic operators request treatment on this part of their land and not that part. And sometimes they actually were leasing to an organic landowner, and it wasn't through detailed conversation where we were able to eliminate that part of the property from treatments. And I'll get into that a little bit, but protecting the organic properties is important to us, and we want to make sure that we have that good communication. There might be threatened and dangerous species, but that hasn't affected us too much in Montana on the rangeland. Just so you know what pesticides that if we are treating for grasshoppers, these are them: alpha-ionic carbaryl, and then diflubenzuron. Dimlen's the primary brand name, and that's the one that affects the exoskeleton of a grasshopper and keeps them from going from one life stage to another. And then Prevathon is something that I don't think that's a biopesticide, but it's close. Yeah, but it's not available. It's not labeled yet. We've assessed it in our EIS, but it's not labeled for our treatments yet. So we need to look at that and see if it's going to be available in the future. But I still don't think it's going to be something that's available for grasshopper suppression. And you're going to ask about nosema here in a little bit, and I'll get into that. I'm going to just move on because none of you guys are probably too interested in the pesticides, but you can call me and talk to me about that. Again, the rats process that we do means that we only treat about half of the area. We'll leave about half of it untreated. But again, in an organic program, you would need zero. But this is, if there was adjacent rangeland to your operation, this is what we would this is all we do anymore. We have not done any conventional blanket coverage in the last 20 years. I'm just going to keep going because we're short on time here. We'll talk about brand and bait. Now there's different kinds. That one on the left is like a rolled brand. The one on the right is little pellets, and they have a mid-sized crumbles. That's usually made out of apple pumice. And I'm sure an organic operator would say, well, is there something I can use to suppress grasshoppers that's not a pesticide? Nosema locusta is often the one brand that I know of is called Nolo bait. And I had a lot of people call me about that, and they couldn't find it. There wasn't. It's a naturally occurring pathogen. It is a biopesticide, but it really only works when there's moderate populations. APHIS, my agency, actually back in probably in the, I don't know, it was the 80s or the early 90s, did some large scale treatments using Nosema, and determined that it really wasn't a quick suppressant, which is when we get involved of grasshopper populations. It might be a good management tool. I've heard stories of people who use it regularly that believe that it does keep the grasshopper populations down. I'm just saying that APHIS and our role is to suppress grasshopper populations when they become damaging, that it's not an effective tool for that. It's pretty slow acting, affects their digestive system. But that's the one tool for treating grasshoppers that I'm aware of. And again, APHIS doesn't use it because it doesn't meet our objectives of a quick knockdown. There is carbaryl bait. Again, it is a pesticide, but it doesn't have much drift. So if there's a way that you could use maybe a pesticide adjacent to your operation, this would ensure that the drift would be minimized. Mormon crickets love it. Here's what you do need to know is that certain species, you'll get some effect with carbaryl bait. These species, you'll get not so good, probably throwing your money out. And some species, you're just throwing bait out into the ground and they're not even going to eat it and you're wasting your money. So that's where it gets to know your grasshopper species before you try to determine what kind of control to use, because basically that's the habit is just they just don't eat bran off the ground, and that would go to Nosema as well. They just don't eat things off the ground. They get up on vegetation. So make sure you know what it is you're trying to treat before you use any kind of brand bait to make sure you're not wasting money. Again, these are the things that we do. We do surveys, technical assessments, and treatment programs. And my time's already up, but I have to go through this. I'm going to give you a little time lapse. I'm going to zip through these pretty quick. This is, you can't see the top of my slide, but this was several years ago. And the red is where the grasshoppers had a really high population. Blue means there's a few grasshoppers out there, which there should be, but not very many. And I'm going to just skip through the years here. And then, I got a thing on the top of the screen. I can't tell what year that is, but a couple of years ago, you started seeing that grasshopper populations were starting to come up. And then predicting for last year, this is what we predicted was going to happen last year. What actually did happen last year was somewhat like this, but after the treatment season was over and we did an adult survey, this is our adult survey, and it's not perfect because we had a couple of employees that dropped the ball on us. But as you can see, the red is maybe a little bit smaller, but the orange, which is anything from 8 to 15, which is still a lot of grasshoppers per yard. And if they all lay their eggs and we continue to have a mild winter like this, we could have, another explosion of grasshoppers next year. So this is what we found in the late summer. This is what you might predict, a predictive model, the best we can for next year. And those of you that are over in the west, over here in the Hot Springs area, in the Flathead Valley and on the Flathead Reservation, there's a perpetual problem over there. There's a different type of grasshopper over there that we didn't get into, but they love it over there. Anyway, there's still a potential for some big outbreaks over there. And we do work with the tribe over there, and they request our assistance. But you can see Montana is the worst. You might joke that North Dakota and Wyoming doesn't want to count, but Wyoming is pretty progressive with their treatments, and they treated a lot of that right up to Montana in the past. And so those populations have plummeted. North Dakotans, we can tell North Dakotan jokes all day. They never can count. I tell them to use both hands when they start counting their grasshoppers, but they get to about 5 and stop. But that if you've ever got driven from Montana to North Dakota, it goes from dry into a little more lush, a lush world at that border. It really is a different ecosystem. But again, it's the Plant Protection Act that gives us authority. So here's the deal. We can treat federal land adjacent to private land. That's where we would need to know, but we really don't do that unless that private landowner on the private side is asking. They're worried about the federal grasshoppers moving off and onto your land. So if somebody doesn't ask for it, we don't do anything. So we can do some little border treatments. We really don't get involved unless there's 10,000 acres or more. And I know that sounds like a lot, but that's the minimum where we get involved. Otherwise, we tell people to manage their own grasshoppers. It's a rangeland program, not a cropland, although we can include a little bit if it's labeled and everything. And there's a cost share. So I'm just letting you know what the program is. If you want to talk about it more, we'll do it another day because I'm running out of time. But here's the key point is that we don't do anything for any landowner ever unless they ask us to. So you don't ever have to worry about your land being treated directly by us. We would need to know if you're adjacent to it unless you ask us to. And like I said, there was some organic operators that asked us to be part of their land and not other part of their land. These are all people we deal with, the tribe, the BIA. We ask everybody that requests our treatment, we ask if they have adjacent landowners that are organic. They may or may not know, though. That's the problem. That gets back to that question about how do we know? We want to be diligent and we want to not have any drift or any issues, but if we don't know, that makes it difficult. And there's cooperative agreements. We get maps. We do work with endangered species with the Fish and Wildlife Service. The EA will come out, and we can go through Jamie. Jamie can give you all a chance to comment on that. I don't remember when it came out. Last year, I think in January. Whenever we get to it is when it comes out. But
Yeah,
it'll be January.
we didn't get it until just before the deadline for the comments. So
Yeah, yeah. So that this is the first year that we really kind of have communicated better, and it was still marginal with the organics groups, and it's in the paper. We put it in the paper. We let everybody know, but we don't know all the special interest groups, which you are, and we will make sure that you're on our list now that we know. And we welcome all that feedback. And you can go look right now at the environmental impact statement. It's online on our website. And look, you can start looking at that now if that's the type of thing you want to do. But we monitor what we do. We look at the water, and any if there was an organic field, we would we could put die cards out there, which means we can tell if the pesticide reached that property or not, or if it didn't. So anyway, now it's the time to plan. There is my contact information. I talked really fast. Jamie asked if anybody wants pesticide certification credits, that you scan this, and I will stop a little longer than I should have, but we got 5 minutes, I think, for questions if there are some.
yeah, you're good. Sam has a question. Does milk or molasses products kill grasshoppers?
Let me see if I can actually read her question, because I didn't get it. I am not familiar with, what was it? Molasses and what?
Milk?
Oh, milk or molasses products kill grasshoppers. I don't know. I think I read something online, but that doesn't make it true. But I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I'll look into that and see if I can provide some information to you. And I know that some of the organic stuff is small scale, and some, the part of what we do is pretty large scale. And so some of these tools might work, in a small operation. Milk or molasses, I don't know how expensive that would be, but let me look into that a little bit more. But that's not a tool we would use, but we'll look into it.
And then we have a question about natural predators of grasshoppers.
Yep. Actually, lots and lots of things eat grasshoppers. Lots. There's predatory beetles. There's mice, spiders, and you're talking about climate disruption changes. Maybe our next speaker can talk about how drought is affecting our population of organisms. But if you remember back,
what I meant was is that if there are predators, and you said there's lots of them,
Yeah.
have the decline in predators been a cause of the bigger outbreaks? And then were that loss of predators climate related?
Well, I would speculate that as we learned in school, and you think about rabbit populations exploding, and then the fox population, increases as a result of the abundance of prey, and then the prey declines, and then the foxes decline. That these explosions of grasshoppers are cyclical. We've had them for thousands of years, and that it does happen like that. And so the predator population would I didn't realize that there was a loss of predators as a result of climate changes. That's an interesting, I would like to hear more about that, because that's interesting. But I think that the grasshopper population starting to decline, and predators, of course, are on the increase because there's lots of food.
Well, except that climate could be hurting birds and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if there's any research on that, because it would seem like a natural area of research.
Well, I'm not researching it, but I'm going to take your question, and here's what I can tell you is that we have a group of grasshopper enthusiasts, we'll say. It's called the National Grasshopper Management Board. It's actually led by state departments of agriculture, not from the federal standpoint. And we have a lot of researchers in there that come and present, and that'll be in early February. And I will bring this question to them, to that group, to the researchers. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. We have another question from Shauna. Is there any water quality monitoring associated with suppression activities? She indicates she knows that there are a lot of studies turning up with pesticides in surface and groundwaters in the Midwest. Sounds like the contamination has more to do with repeated use and seed coatings, but was wondering how that works in Montana.
Yeah, here's what we do is that we identify all the water, surface water that is out there, and we buffer that by a minimum of 500 feet for all of our application. And then for the amount of people that we have, we put some die cards out around the water to further justify that none of our pesticide reach that water source. But yeah, we do everything we can to try to prevent any contamination of the water, because the pesticides that we do use would impact aquatic insects, and we do not want to have that impact on them. So that's the mitigation measures that we take to try to prevent that to the extent possible. But yeah, I think most of the water quality stuff in the Midwest is probably from runoff, and the rates we use is so low. It's 1 ounce of Dimilin per an entire acre, that the chance of that running off on rangeland where there's very little water anyway is not very unlikely.
But is it monitored anyway?
Yes. Yeah, well, with the die cards, we put the die cards out there, unless we think there's if we see spots or something, some reason to think that we accidentally discharged into the water. And I say we contract people to do that. We will take water samples and have that analyzed to see if there was something in there, but we haven't had a reason to collect any water in recent times. There's very little water where we treat, honestly. It's out in the prairie and a few stock ponds, and we monitor those. But so we monitor the pesticide application. We don't necessarily monitor the water unless we think there was an application to them.
Tracy, on that note, Tracy has a question about the effectiveness of treatments in relation to the heat. She brings that up because she's in Prairie County, which has about 49% government land ownership. And this past summer, the planes sprayed here for what seemed like a month early in the morning. Someone who filled the planes with fuel learned and shared with us that the pilots said the grasshopper spray was ineffective due to the high temperatures, but the pilots would not get paid unless they dumped the spray. So these pilots would fly out and open the spray hatch carelessly to dump the spray every day so they could get paid. This is part of the broken system. I bring this up for awareness and not any sort of debate. So I guess the question is about effectiveness.
Well, did the pilots say that they opened the spray hatch just to dump it? That would surprise me. What we have what's required of the contracts is that they have a GPS map that's put into their into their plane, and then they are required to record when their boom is on and when it's off, so that they can demonstrate back to us where they treated and where they didn't. And there's a couple occasions where they, mess that up, and we call them out on that. But if they were just dumping it out there, that would be news to me. There's a couple flight logs that didn't get relayed to us, and I imagine if somebody was trying to hide something, that could be the case, but that is not the norm. The heat does cause that shouldn't affect the effectiveness of the pesticide. What it would, if it's really hot, it affects the ability for them to fly, and it affects the evaporation of the water part of the mixture, because a lot of the formulation is over 2/3 of it is water, but it's still mixed with a crop oil that allows it to come to the surface. So I don't know about the dumping of pesticide. If they're doing that, we would certainly want some more information on that, because that's not acceptable and a bad deal. But we have the flight logs that demonstrate where they treated and where they didn't, and
So-
shut off of the water.
So you're saying that heat does not make it less effective? High temperatures?
I don't have any indication that that's the case, no.
So if someone hears something like that, they should contact your office?
Yeah, if they got some information on that, I would like to know more information, because if we got contractors that are dumping pesticide, that's a issue. Yeah, I had not previously heard that. And I would like to know more about that, because we have a contractor who then subcontracts to other pilots in this particular year, because it was a big year. And, maybe somebody's out there doing some shenanigans, and we would want to know that, because we certainly do not want to have a irresponsible program. I can assure you that's not acceptable.
Okay, let's do 2 more questions. One, Rebecca wants to know if there's been any trials with on-farm animal integrations to manage grasshoppers.
Like chickens. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. Again, our APHIS's role is quick suppression, so we don't really get into management of grasshoppers per se. But yeah, and unless it's like chickens and turkeys, I know that's been something that's been used since, like I said, back in the Dust Bowl days. But when you have literally millions of acres of grasshoppers, I don't know if you can ever get enough chickens to manage that. So I don't have an answer. I'm sorry, I don't have. If you have some examples, I would like to know what those examples might be, that we could, again, I could pitch to the group in February.
I know I was contacted by a farmer in South Dakota who used turkeys, but it wasn't a trial. It wasn't a scientific based. It was just his own work. Doug has a question. Does tillage fall or early spring have any impact on viability?
Yes, I would say yes. So tillage in farm settings, now that we're going into a lot of no-till settings, I think that's also contributing probably to some increase in grasshoppers, because the eggs are left undamaged. But tillage in the fall and or spring, bringing probably better in the fall, they would either bury the eggs deeper than where they can emerge, or it would bring them to the surface where they would desiccate over the course of the winter. And so tillage after egg laying, which is starting probably in September or October, I think absolutely would have an impact on the grasshoppers that had eggs laid in that field. Now the adjacent untilled rangeland still represents a different challenge, but it would certainly affect. It certainly affect. I asked people ask about harrowing through pastures, and I think harrowing does minimal effect on grasshopper eggs. You would want to disrupt that egg pod that's in the soil and either bury it or bring it to the surface.
Oh, so I said 2 more questions, but Michael let me know that his presentation isn't very long. So do you mind taking a couple more, Gary?
Well, I'm not doing a very good job of answering them. So if you want to keep going, we'll do it. Yeah, whatever. This is the time.
Okay. Craig asks, are any crops or plants more resistant to grasshoppers than others?
Well, again, it depends on the species of grasshoppers. If it's if the species of grasshopper wants your crop, I think you're going to see that impact. I'm trying to think if like safflower. I don't know if I've ever heard of grasshoppers and safflower. It's like a big tough thistle, but I guess I don't know the answer to that either. I don't know about crop insurance either, but go ahead and ask the question.
Yeah, the question is, well, it kind of related in that you said this is only a rangeland program, and why isn't it a cropland program too? I mean, is that just because they never created it?
Yeah, I think the authority within the Plant Protection Act was intended that the federal government stay out of people's business, but the return on the value of an acre of rangeland is so low, and we're trying to keep the stewards of the land on the land, that there was a reason where the government might be able to assist on this wide acres of rangeland. And presumably, and I know you might laugh at this, but presumably there's enough return on your investment on an acre of cropland that managing any pest within the cropland would not require government assistance.
Yeah, and the reason I might asking that, it is related to crop insurance, and I should know the answer, but I believe that damage by grasshoppers would be a insurable cause of loss for a crop farmer. Therefore, you could argue, well, they've got it protected under their crop insurance. So if they take crop insurance, why would the federal government have to provide free or subsidized, management of grasshoppers for them? But I'm not absolutely certain of that. And you don't know that there's any, in other words, some people would, I think it might be the case that if a farmer does not treat, and this might be really hard for organic farmers, does not treat the problem, then they can't assert it as a cause of loss. But I'm not sure that that's the case. And that's what I was wondering, but you don't know that issue.
I don't know about crop insurance, but I can tell you that, the Farm Service Agency, who deals with other types of disaster like drought and fire, that they have inquired about grasshopper damage in the past, and that was not considered one of those
insurable cause of loss.
Yeah, that was not part of the FSA.
I'd be really suspicious of that, but did any other farmers know who might have made a claim based on grasshopper damage?
I guess
we made a crop insurance claim, and they put it under heat. I mean, even though there was grasshopper damage.
Oh,
they called it heat.
Drought
they called it heat.
Yeah.
The adjuster called it heat. Interesting.
Same with me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that sounds like probably correct. The grasshoppers were like a secondary result of the drought and the heat.
Interesting. That's very good to know. Thank you very much.
See, I see a comment about the comment about a buffer there. I'd like to have whoever that was maybe explain what they did there, because that's kind of a key to some of what you need to do.
Doug, do you want to jump in there?
I haven't used it. I was just curious if it was an effective management technique. I think Tracy maybe.
Well, Tracy said that something worked for there. I was wondering what Tracy said.
So we're on an irrigated farm, and we usually cut all of our buffer zones for like grass, hay, and this year we didn't cut anything. We just left everything, and it got tall, and that's what the grasshoppers ate till probably the end of the season. And then we, after they just destroyed everything around our fields, then they moved into our crops. So it worked for us, but.
So it wasn't a treatment buffer, it was just a forage buffer to allow them to focus on that instead of the crop. Interesting.
I did notice with I grew some of the industrial seed hemp, and they went after the oil seed. I thought it was because of oil seed, but the hemp plants last, but they did eventually get there.
How big of buffers are those? I'm just curious.
I guess I'm curious if a barrier buffer, like a buffer of safflower, for instance, around a wheat field would have any impact. deterrence?
Here's what I can tell you some anecdotal stories. So there was a flax field up just out of Malta, and it didn't have any grasshoppers early in the season. And when they become flying adults, they can fly 10,000 feet and 100 miles, and that field was almost a complete loss. So there wasn't nothing in there. So that lesser migratory species can travel long distance until they see something that they want, and they will drop down and, out of the sky and eat it. So other species that don't move long distances, or when they're young, they hop on the ground. They don't fly. When they're young, they're hopping. And another place in Phillips County, they had a spring wheat field that was planted, and it started coming up, and they moved in mass in like a band. And by the time I visited, which is in July, it was dirt. They never plowed it. They never anything. There was not one leaf of green in there. So they can move a long distance. If you're trying to leave a buffer of vegetation to keep them out of your production area, that would not have worked in Phillips County, because nothing grew there. There was no forage in the rangeland to stop them. If you're fortunate enough to have long grass or something adjacent to your property, that would be good. Irrigated, she mentioned it was irrigated, so that helps a little bit. If we apply pesticide adjacent to the protected area, it's a quarter to a half a mile is what we recommend. So smaller, throwing out a little spreader of grain right next to your fields probably not going to stem the tide. When the grasshoppers are at the level they were the last year, they were just too high. They were just so high that it was hard to stop them under any means. Hopefully in the next few years they start to decline and we go back to the quiet years.
I believe David Sands is working on some wheat breeding specifically to build buffers. He has a presentation today at noon, and so that might be a good question to ask him about the variety of wheat that he has been working on.
Yeah, Dave's got some interesting stuff going on. I'm not sure what he's going on right now, but yeah, he's always got something.
So yeah, he's at lunch. Let's see. Becky's curious about whether there has been much discussion at APHIS about long-term prospects if drought is prolonged. Do you expect to treat in perpetuity? Will the grasshoppers give out as forage supply does?
Here's where the studies come in. The long-term studies, our sister agency, the Ag Research Service, is the science branch, and we're the implementation branch. So APHIS does look into that. And I can tell you that David Branson, who I tried to join me here today, but he couldn't make it. He thinks that the drought in eastern Montana was, I got to keep looking at your question, make sure I'm answering it right. He thinks that the drought this past summer in eastern Montana was so significant that it is going to have a significant negative impact on the grasshoppers, which means that they were struggling so hard to find valuable forage that their egg laying and egg viability will be greatly diminished strictly because of the drought. So just like if other things are impacted on it, the grasshoppers hopefully will also be negatively impacted by that drought. Really, we won't know until we start looking at them next year to see if that's true. But that's his prediction. So let's hope that that's the case.
And now we get rain in the meantime. Jeff, did you want to just jump in quick so we can move on to Michael then too?
Yeah, I just wanted to let you guys know I did write it in the chat, but curiously, insect damage is considered. I just looked on the RMA related work is considered a cause of loss. So it's very curious to me that they would call it heat why they just call it insects as the cause of loss.
Wasn't that heat related to the Farm Service Agency, not Risk Management Agency?
No, well, I don't know the FSA, but I'm talking about insurance. Insurance is run by RMA. And so RMA and your adjuster, when you had an insurable cause of loss, I'm not talking about disaster or other programs. I'm talking about insurable cause of loss. you would think they would mark it as insect damage. Therefore, that's the cause of loss rather than heat. But maybe for FSA disaster programs, they call it heat instead of locust. I don't know. But it is curious because it is a defined cause of loss under RMA, which does handle crop insurance. Just FYI.
Yep.
There were multiple things that were happening, so they just picked one in my case.
Yeah, that's another interesting issue.
Yeah.
Well,
You know,
you want to go.
heat has not, drought has always been kind of a factor in what we've done, but heat was kind of a new one this year. And again, up in Phillips County, we had a fairly sizable block that was asked to be treated by a number of landowners. And if you remember in June, we had a period of about 3 or 4 days of 100+ temperatures in June. It was crazy. Well, it burnt, in their opinion, this is their term, that heat burnt, any vegetation that had grown that spring down to nothing. And then we had the planes sitting there, and they got gathered up, and they said, never mind. There's nothing for us to save this year. Let's not try to stress grasshoppers. So drought is one thing, grasshopper is one thing, and heat was like this third extreme that really affected resources this year. It was crazy.
Yeah, no, and heat is, there seems to be evidence that they often call them flash droughts too, is another term I've heard recently. So yeah, and those kind of extreme heat events, whether you call them drought, they're not drought because they're not long term over a period of time, but they call them flash droughts or heat. But see, that's not necessarily specific. That's not grasshopper damage. That's heat damage, and that's why. Anyway, that's to be discussed with the adjusters and RMA what they're calling these things, because otherwise we won't document well the causes of loss in the United States if we don't be careful how we're causing these losses, what we're calling them.
It'll never be documented down in history as something that was a factor. That's true.
Well, Gary, thank you so much for taking the time to have this discussion, and hopefully we can build a closer relationship. And I hope everyone on the call will feel free to reach out to Gary if you have additional questions. And I look forward to a continued working relationship. So thanks again, Gary, your time and effort. And I like some of those slides. There's some.
You guys asked some good questions. You're a smart bunch, and I like smart people. So keep us in check. We want to do the right thing. We're not trying to ruin the world. We're trying to help people. So anyway, thanks, Jamie. I can stay on. I can stay on and listen though, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah, please do. And join Dr. Dave too at lunch.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. So next we have Michael Downey, who's with the state, and he is developing the state drought plan. I was surprised this summer. I was talking to a friend who also works in Michael's section, and he indicated that actually there are some things that can be done to mitigate the effects of drought. The state is putting together a task forces around the area based on region. And I think, Tracy, you're participating in one of those task forces. Is that true?
No, I never heard back. So
okay.
That never got set up.
Oh, shoot.
It's okay.
Well, it's always one of those things, if you can get on some of the state task forces, that's a really good thing to do. We always need organic people on anything like that. So I will toss it over to Michael. And Michael is with the water planning section at the State Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. He grew up on an isolated cattle ranch on the edge of the Great Basin, northwest of Reno, and moved to Helena in the spring of 1994. Michael, take it away.
Well, good morning. Thanks for having me here today. That was a really interesting conversation, maybe because I know nothing about grasshoppers, and it's nice to have somebody else that's gloom and doom. and not just me when it comes to talking about drought. I've really been feeling like an Eeyore these days for, it seems like it's been a while. So let me share my screen. It says that this will stop the other screen sharing, and I'll go to that. Select a window. Are you seeing my screen now?
No, Gary Adams, can you stop sharing your screen?
Let's see.
There we go.
All right, let's see here now. Now, for some reason, it diminished. It diminished you. Oh, come on. Thumbnail. Let's see here. Oh, there we go. All right, let's try this again. All right, screen one. It says that I'm sharing my screen, but you're not seeing it.
Yeah, we do see it.
Oh, you do? Oh,
Yes.
great. So then let me do this, but I'm probably not in presentation mode.
No.
So let's see, here we go. Present slideshow. Here we go. Now, are you seeing me in presentation mode? No, select the window that you
All
want.
good. All good. It looks great.
Great. So I'm going to just talk about, I'm going to talk really more about our drought and kind of where we are with respect to the drought and water supply. And then I'll get into our drought plan update and talk about that. And talk about, there's still, for any of you that still want to be involved, there's still going to be lots of opportunity to get involved. And Tracy, you know, we should trade information here, because I think you're right. It would be great. I think there's good representation by ag on these groups, but I think that certainly for folks like you and the organic farmers, you offer a little bit different perspective, and so it's going to be important to get that perspective. So in talking about the drought, I just wanted to talk a little bit about where we've come from, and so are you seeing my December 3rd, 2019 map there? Yes. And so, which is really, so if we look at things, this was 2 years ago now, and if we look at where we were, actually to see a map with Montana with no drought and no abnormally dry conditions is actually pretty unusual. So it wasn't that long ago, even though it seems to me like a long time ago, that we were really in pretty good shape. So, but if we look at the drought this year, I think that we keep talking about, well, the drought of 2021, and really the drought started, it really started in May of 2020. So we're well into a 2-year drought event right now. And I think that we're going to find that it continues. So December 1st of last year, you know, we abnormally dry at that time in 64% of the state, which is obviously a lot, in moderate drought in about a third of the state, and then severe drought and even extreme drought in that far southeastern corner. Here's where we are today, and to say that things are bleak would be an understatement. We haven't really, as my next slide will show, we haven't in the years of the U.S. Drought Monitor, which started in 2000. This is we're in our kind of worst case scenario by a ways, and I think and does not spell well for this next year. I mean, that said, things can change. Things can change quickly. But if you look at a drought, I mean, typically when we're talking about drought in, shall we say, our modern era, I mean, it's really the 2000s. It's the early 2000s drought that we looked at. There was about 5 years there of pretty intense drought in Montana. I think that you can see, though, that even at the height of that drought in that kind of 03 to the middle of 05, we're quite a bit worse than that, in that now we've been really since July, we've had nearly 100% of the state has been in D2, which we call severe drought or worse. So we're really in kind of a, at least for the modern era, we didn't have the US Drought Monitor there in the late 80s. But in terms of looking at this kind of metric, we really haven't seen conditions like this before. I'd like to go back to our last severe drought was in 2017, and I think part of what made 2017 different than this year is that you referenced flash drought, and that year really was a flash drought. We had a unusually high precipitation in the fall of 2016, which really changed the dynamic for what we saw in 2017. And if you look at that January 1st to May 1st, what we call SPI, which is our standardized precipitation index, which indexes precipitation, it's modeled. It takes both station data and model data and puts that together. Really, that January 1st to May 1st did not look so bad. And in that year, what happened is that it was really about the middle of April, things shut off and it got hot. And we really had a pretty unusual event, in that it truly was a flash drought. And suddenly, into May and June had temps that were up into the triple digits. Now this, I guess what I find worrisome to me is that this was our for that same period in January 1 to May 1 of this year, we had this was what that map looked like. And so if you're looking, I mean, particularly in terms of looking at impacts, certainly northeastern, actually eastern Montana bore the brunt of the situation this year. I guess what I find really worrisome is that just how dry things have been this fall. We had some decent storms. Certainly that storm in early October in that kind of Miles City country, Miles City, Baker, it will help. And we did see a response in terms of our soil moisture from that storm. I think that people talk about, well, we had a great August, we had a record-breaking August, and yeah, I mean, part of it is that a record-breaking August is not saying much. When you get an inch of precip and your normal's a half inch, well, you're double your normal, but it's still not very much, especially in the heat of summer.
Michael, we have two questions related to the definition of drought and the definition of flash drought.
Okay, well, that is a great question. Two great questions. And so really, when we talk about drought, we look at a variety, we look at a slew of metrics, and I'll be the first to tell you that, and maybe that's what I find more interesting about this, is that it's a combination of kind of art and science as we define drought. And so for the US Drought Monitor, we look at a whole variety of metrics to make that determination. From we look at temperature, we look at precipitation, we look at evaporative demand, we look at soil moisture, we look at stream flows. So there's not a hard line that says when we're well, now we've reached the spot where now we're in drought. And it's really, we look at and which is why also if we get a big rain event, especially in the kind of eastern half of the state where we've got pretty tight soils, we're not going to say, okay, well, we were in a drought and now we got this big event, now we're no longer in drought. It's a longer, we like to look at least those 60 to 90 day timescales and kind of look at those metrics within that time frame, look at soil moisture, how are our streams responding. So that's a difficult question. I'd say with flash drought, it's where we had that that pretty interesting to go back into 2017 and look at a map like that. We were set up, we'd had that great fall where I wish I had that graphic to show that, but we had I think in Blaine County, parts of Blaine County, you're out there and it was flooding in October. And so we were really set up well. And then of course, as we now know, in middle of May, it shut off and it got hot. And suddenly we were in a drought. And so I think that really that flash drought, whereas this drought this year, it's been a good old fashioned drought. It's one of those that, it's like it's a slow moving freight train, and before you know it, it's just run you over. And because it really did start in May of 2020, whereas in 2017 everything was set up to where we were going to have it looked like we were in for a good year, and especially given that fall. And I think that's what's so concerning about our situation this year is that now we're into a 2-year drought. I think it's fair to say that even with a pretty well of a record year for this winter, we're still probably going to be in drought next spring. It takes a while to respond, and we've kind of lost so much in terms of soil moisture. I think that obviously with a good spring, we could see our streams and our potholes and that surface water storage can jump back pretty quickly. But in terms of that soil moisture deficit, we're in kind of a long haul situation. This is what we saw June, July of this year, and I think that was when we were looking at June of this year, it was so dry and so hot. And for a lot of that area, we were down, in the 10th percentile anyway for moisture in June. June is typically our wettest month. We're working on some other tools this year. I think that part of what is a little bit deceptive about our drought monitoring and some of the tools that we use is that it doesn't really factor in timing as well as it should. And as we well know, whether you get that moisture at the end of April versus the middle of June makes a big difference. And then if you get that moisture, the end of July is not the same as moisture that you got on July 1. And so there's really a timing factor that comes into play that is hard to difficult, and it is difficult to measure and is difficult to communicate to the folks at the U.S. Drought Monitor that are a lot of those people are in the Midwest, and it's just I feel like sometimes they don't get us, and they also don't get the margins that we're operating on. It's just when you get 30 inches of moisture in your growing season versus 10, it's just different. This is for our vegetative health index. This is where we were end of September. That pink red is bad. It was a really dry fall. You can see in the Northwest where things aren't so bad. And I think that actually this year, and as I'll show a little bit later with the projections, is that we probably may see us coming out of drought in the Northwest. This is where we were in September of 2017. I think that there again, 2017 was interesting because 2018 we had a really good winter. And so that drought, if you look back at it, so what's different this year is that arguably, I think that depending upon who you are in your discipline, you might not agree with this, but at least in terms of precipitation, that was a 1-year drought. Whereas this is a good old-fashioned drought. Not to say that any droughts are good, but different in that sense, and that it's not the flash drought that we saw in 2017. I think that one of the areas where we really missed the boat this year was in the evaluation of our snowpack. If you look at this map on June 1st, for a number of the basins, we were showing 100% snowpack. Part of that was driven by that late season. We had that Memorial Day storm that actually gave us some of that high elevation precipitation. I think that part of the trouble is that we measure, for the most part, we're measuring snowpack through high elevation snow tell. And I think that the last few years have shown that that's probably not gonna, that's not gonna work. Because I think what's so surprising is June 1st, here we were, and in the Muscle Shell, we were at 115%, the Smith, 100%. You know, that upper Missouri, and Southwest was low, as you can see. Here's where we were 2 weeks later, which we were 0 everywhere in the state. And of course, and I think that this year was interesting, is that despite going from 100% to 0 in a matter of 2 weeks, we didn't see really terribly high water. I could show you more graphs for that, but it's just, we really didn't see terribly high water this year. And so that tells me not that, so where did that moisture go? If we really had 100% of snowpack, I would argue that we didn't. That snow wasn't there. And we've actually developed a tool, and maybe we can get in, I can show you somehow to work that, that's looking at our snowpack this year, and it's going to look at it a little bit differently. And what we're using is, I'm trying to get the guys that I work with at the Montana Climate Office to change this, because Hipsami Sui, it's like, well, no one knows what that means, but they're kind of a geeky bunch. But this graph here really shows what was going on in that top, in this blue area. That's what SNOTEL was. This red area here shows everything else that was missing. And so while our SNOTEL estimate, as we saw in the previous slide, this slide was at 100%. In fact, using a different model, which we call SNODAS, we can see that it was estimating we were only at 60% of normal. And that really is what happened. As you can see from this hydrograph here on the lower right, this shows how our snowpack actually came off. And of course, we never, in terms of that discharge, we were never even up. We were never even in kind of in that normal zone. And so I think that this year we've had all of our hydrologists have said we need this product for quite some time. We're going to have a lot better, easier way to estimate where we are in terms of our snowpack. And that was one of the areas we really should have known that we were going to see low flows sooner than we did. And so I think that that's one of the ways that we'll see an improvement this year in terms of our forecasting of where we are and what's available. And so just in terms of this tool, we've got the Upper Missouri River Basin Drought Dashboard, and you can go and you can click on a watershed. This is broken up by watersheds, and it'll tell you where we are right now. And in the Judith, you know, at our high elevation, we've got some moisture, but you can see what we're missing. We're certainly quite low right now for snowpack. But then if you get down into the still water, which is down here, and you can see here when we've got more of our blue, well, we're closer to normal down there within that basin. So I do think that this is going to be a better tool for estimating where we are in terms of our snowpack. In terms of that seasonal precipitation outlook, this is actually improved from where we were just a month or so ago. You know, now they really are looking for at least the western 2/3 of the state is getting above normal precipitation. Personally, I wouldn't take that to the bank. These 3 months, these longer 3-month forecasts have proven in the past to not be terribly accurate. Similarly, for temperature, they show us dropping, which I don't know, at 60, it was 58 degrees when I came out the door this morning. And I think that they're looking at a high of 66 today. So that below normal temperature, at least for this early December, is not going to be the case. You know, last year was unusual. And I think that for Southwest Montana, there's others that can speak to this better. I mean, I think that part of it is that we're starting to see, we're transitioning to getting more of our precipitation in February, March, and getting less of our precipitation in May, June, which is a real switch. And I think that we're seeing a lot of the impacts of that in that summer precipitation that we're not seeing presenting problems for everyone. Of course, if you have storage and you have irrigation, you're in a different situation than a lot of the rest of the producers and people that are relying on range conditions. But right now, the outlook looks pretty good. I think that here again, for that long-term outlook for drought, does not look good for eastern Montana. They're showing that the Northwest probably has the best prospects for coming out of drought. The other half of the state, that drought is going to continue, and when we might well see some improvement in that eastern quarter or so of the state. Eastern third of the state is likely going to be persistent, I think, through the year. Right now, with the conditions that we are for soil moisture, I think even with a really good year, we're still going to be seeing some effects of this drought for some time. I'm going to go on and quickly talk about, Jamie, how are we for time?
I mean, we're good. We can go on here where there's nothing after this.
Okay.
So as long as anyone and you're able to stay on.
Yeah, no, you bet. I've got to jump off after this, but no, we can still go. I just want to talk now about our drought management plan and what we have going here. And our current plan was done in 1995, which is, I don't think that, well, I had gone to work for DNRC in 94. I think we first kind of got our first computer stations about 95, and I think we got email that year. So it's been a while. It's overdue, and we've got a lot of tools for evaluating drought. There's certainly been a lot of work in drought adaptation and resilience around the country, and so there's a lot of room for improvement here. And so really, when we look at when we look at this new drought plan update, this is we've got some funding from the legislature. We also got some funding from the Bureau of Reclamation. And one of the things, this is not going to be DNRC's drought plan. This really is a collaborative effort, both among state agencies and then with our federal partners and with citizens across Montana. And to that end, we put together these regional stakeholder groups that I'll get down to here in a minute. And part of what we really want to get at is instead of just talking about drought and drought response, thinking about drought adaptation and resilience, and how I think that there are some really innovative ways, and have talked to some producers. I think that for post crops, talking to producers in the Northeast this year, that we're having some real good luck with dual cropping, and having better luck with flax and lentils versus just flax or just lentils. And so I think there's a lot of good information to be shared. We can learn from each other. Certainly, soil health and promoting soil health has got to play a big role in developing drought resilience. I think that's been shown through numerous studies that soil health has a big factor. So I think there's a lot to be learned, certainly by us, and information exchange is going to be a big part of this drought plan update. And it really, the desire, that our goal is to develop a more modern and progressive plan that really looks at drought across Montana. And obviously the concerns in the Northwest are different than concerns in the Southeast. I don't think that we have to spend a lot of time, excuse me, talking about wildland urban interface, which is a huge issue in the Northwest, which is not an issue in Plentywood. And so I think that part of this is really getting at is why we've broken the state up into these regional areas and these regional divisions, and pulling together stakeholder groups to talk about both what are the risks vulnerabilities to drought in those areas, because they are going to differ in different parts of the state, and then get into what are the adaptation strategies and responses to drought that are really targeted to those areas. And so, we're having there will be a series of meetings right now. Some of those meetings will be in person, some of those meetings will be online. We've got a task force meeting that is made up of state representatives here on the 8th. I think that meeting will be less interesting than the meeting on the 15th, which is this kind of first regional stakeholder group. That will be an online meeting. I know Tracy, Dion, you said that you didn't hear back. I do want to, if you didn't hear back from us, that was an oversight, because there is still are plenty of opportunities to be involved with this effort. And we do have a drought plan, a web portal. We've had some people sick and out of the office, so that's not in as good a shape as we'd like it. But there is, you can sign up to get our alerts. There is some information there that mtdroughtinfo.org will take you to that site, and you can kind of communicate with us. We'll be posting information there. You can get on our website. You can get on our drought listserv and to get updates, and which of course you can unsubscribe to at any time. And so so please, it'd be great to have. We were looking to get a lot of involvement and a lot of input, and I do think that your group has a little bit different perspective than some of the other ag groups, and so it would be great to hear from you folks as well. That's really all that I have today. Happy to take questions. That Upper Missouri River Basin Drought Indicators website is there, that drought.climate.umt.edu, and there are a lot of tools there. The tool that I was showing you for looking at snowpack, that's there. We also at DNRC on our website, we have a drought impacts reporter that I would like to point out to people, where people can share what are the conditions in your specific area. I mean, there's a lot of area for us to cover when it comes to evaluating drought. And in Montana, often those our weather stations are widely dispersed. And I think, as all of us well know in this state, is diverse both geographically and climatologically. You get a big dump on one side of the ridge, and the other side of the ridge gets nothing. And so it becomes really hard to characterize where conditions are. So we rely on input from producers like you, and really anybody can give us input there. And we actually solicit input where things look good. Where, it's not just where things look bad, but where do they look good? And that helps us to tease out conditions. And you can upload photos, and there at DNRC, at our drought management, on our drought management page, you'll find that link to the Droughts Impact Reporter. I apologize for not bringing that up. There's my contact info. Feel free to reach out to me anytime if you've got other questions about drought. It seems like it's what especially these days, it's what I do pretty much most of the time.
So Michael, with Doug's noting that he keeps hearing about extreme precipitation as part of climate change, but there hasn't been a lot where he's at north of Havre, and instead lots of insignificant precipitation, or less than 1/10 of an inch, and utter lack of precipitation. So that would be something that he could report on this.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And so, what are conditions looking like for you? Because I can tell you, and I think that's what makes things so difficult to read, is that we can have pretty extreme events not terribly far away, and where they got a bunch of moisture. I mean, I think this year in the Northeast, it was pretty interesting. I took a big drive over about a week. I think I did, I don't know how many 1,000 miles. I think that was around 1,700 miles. And there were parts up in northeast of Glasgow, and talking to producers, you could see a line. Talked to several folks that were flying that area, and said, you can see a line where part of that is that precipitation is, and I think that gets into the timeliness component. If you got, we talk about it here in Montana, if you got, it's the $1 million storm, come May or so, and if you got that, then odds are you might get a decent crop. But if you're on the wrong side of the line and you don't, and so I think the extreme events, both in terms of dryness, and we've certainly saw that this year in August, where there were places that got several inches of moisture. I think that part of the trouble now is our soils are so dry. And then especially when you get into some of those tight soils, that will get in and you'll get you'll get some runoff from it, and it'll fill your stock ponds. But in terms of replenishing your soil moisture, may not do much. So it's complicated.
It is. Let's see, we have a couple comments here. Jeff indicates that he was part of the plan in the Big Hole watershed, and wants to know why it takes so long to put the plans together.
Well, I think that, that part of that, I think that I guess I'm not as familiar with what goes on in the Big Hole. Most of my work is, I'm the planner for the Lower Missouri versus the Upper Missouri. So I guess I can't speak specifically to the Big Hole. I think that especially in places in Southwest Montana, we have more people and we have more competing interests in water management and how that is done. I think the Big Hole has been particularly contentious, both in terms of there's a whole recreational component that sees the producers as well. They're just taking the water. And of course, as we well know in the Big Hole, part of the reason that we have flows later in the season in the Big Hole is because of the water that's used for irrigation earlier in the season. So there again, it's complicated. I can't speak specifically to what went on in the Big Hole.
No, I wasn't trying to get it. I was really meant to say that I was part of the 1995 drought management plan, working as the executive director of the Big Hole Water Foundation. But when I heard this announcement of this drought management plan, and given the kind of rapid and extreme events that seem to be occurring, and that's part of my second question is this related obviously to climate disruption? You haven't really mentioned that in your talk, but also that why does it seems like there's a certain urgency to get a new drought management plan done, and having it to 2023 seems a bit long.
Yeah, I think that part of that is because we want to do it right. I mean, I think that there's a lot of new information out there that we want to factor in. We want to factor in certainly the input of people all over the state. I could put together a plan pretty quickly, but I don't know that plan would necessarily reflect the diversity of conditions that we have going on in the state. As opposed to anthropogenic climate change. When it comes to climate change, I don't feel like I need to argue as to in terms of what we're seeing on the ground and why we're seeing that. I think you talk to most producers, are things different than they were 20 years ago? You bet they are. And so I think that our goal is to come up with a plan that helps, that both acknowledges where things are at in terms of the climate, and then looks to develop, okay, so what are the adaptation and response and resilience strategies that we can put together that helps build that drought resilience. I think that we're past the point of just so long, and for so many plans have just focused on drought response. I mean, if you look at, there are other states that do more in terms of drought response and have dedicated funding for that. In Montana, we don't. And so in terms of drought response, when people ask, well, what is the state doing in terms of drought response? I mean, I'll be honest, it doesn't go far beyond we feel your pain. And so I think that our goal is to come up with a plan that that acknowledges drought at the local level and really helps people start to put together some tools to build long-term resilience.
Oli has a question.
Yes, Michael, you used the term old-fashioned drought, and it seems like drought is part of the environment we are in here, so to speak. So if you look at history and you look at this current drought, how does that fit into those patterns or that terminology of an old-fashioned drought?
Yeah, and I guess in terms of an old-fashioned drought, I was really looking to distinguish this year's drought from 2017, which 2017 was a really pretty unusual and really was what we call a flash drought, which is a fairly newer phenomena. And I think that really goes to those extreme events and how quickly things can change. If looking at 2017, we were set up for a good year. We had a good snowpack. I mean, that year was really unusual in that the Yellowstone River was running above normal into September. And that really was a land drought. I think that this one, when I refer to it being old-fashioned, in that it's like the droughts that we were seeing in the early 2000s. It's like the droughts of the late 80s. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess I'm not old enough to know, how things went in the past. But in the sense that this is a drought that we've got low stream flows, we've got low soil moisture. It's going to take longer to dig out of this hole. Kind of like as things were with the Dust Bowl. With those 2000s. So that's what I'm referring to there.
Becky has a question. Do you see any movement to provide more enforcement resources for DNRC? She's thinking particularly of unnecessary pond development competing with existing ag water rights holders.
That's a great question. Montana has an interesting history, and maybe I'll send that to you, Jamie. In that Montana has really, while other states chose to really have an administrative response to both administering and enforcing water rights, Montana did not, and the same continues today. And so if you look at from a statutory standpoint, DNRC, the legislature has told us again and again and again that they do not want us enforcing water rights. That's what you do through the district court. It is I'm probably going to get myself in trouble. It is not an efficient way to enforce water rights, and I think that in part of it speaks to the fact that as a headwater state, while we always feel like we're water short, if you look downstream, we're probably in better shape than most of those folks. But to answer your question, right now we have a process where we're looking at trying to make some bigger changes to the Water Use Act, and that's certainly one of the discussions that's going on right now. Is how do we better enforce water rights? Right now it's that you can file a complaint, and then really to enforce that water right, it's to go to court, which is really I find unsatisfactory. But that's the statutory framework that we currently operate in. I could see that changing.
Yeah, this is Becky. I'm the one who asked that question, and I
Yeah.
have somewhat of a personal vested interest in this issue because I just filed a complaint with DNRC with a neighbor, and in this county, I'm in Gallatin County, and we're seeing unbelievably absurd development practices. And there have been efforts to introduce stuff into the legislature, but the Builders Association and other lobbyists have a stranglehold, and I'm just wondering, and I filed a complaint with the DNRC, but the local staffer basically said, I'm gonna do my best, but I can't make any promises. And I feel like the Gallatin County is also one of the places in the state that could theoretically really address food insecurity, even in the face of drought. But we can't do it if the developers control our entire government. So I'm searching for answers.
And Becky, I hear you. In fact, I was just thinking about this the other night as we talk about and have kind of been involved with talking about drought even at the national level. And I really think that, at what point do we start to see a tipping point? And did the Anasazi, how long ahead of time did the Anasazi know that they were hitting the tipping point? And it was time to go. But I think you're right. At some point, we're going to have to start making some difficult decisions about development versus food production. And I don't even want to start to speculate what it's going to take to make that happen. But you're absolutely right. And I think that generally our regional offices, they will investigate those complaints. They will do what they can. But if you look at in terms of the law and where the law stands, we can't do much, which I apologize for.
Cheered me right up. Thanks.
Let's take one more question. I will say just a quick, somebody mentioned Kyle Bozinski, who's at the University of Montana in the climate office, and he does some work with, he's actually an anthropologist, and looking at the Southwest and human habitation and density. So it's really interesting, matched with climate data. The last question is, has anyone put topo map overlays on the drought maps to see if the differences in moisture have affected certain areas? And are there practices farmers could use to potentially increase either snow or rain retention, like tree plantings, snow fences, cover crops, etc.?
And other great questions. And I think that's part of what we want to get at even in our drought plan update. I think there's no doubt that soil health and your ability to be drought resilient has a huge impact. So that thing, cover crops, I think that we're seeing some of our no-till guys are really seeing some benefits there. So I think that there are certainly steps that you can take. I think that in terms of doing a topographic analysis of where we're seeing drought, part of it too is that we are not to the point yet of kind of doing a field evaluation, a field level evaluation of drought conditions. We are expanding the Montana Mesonet. We are expanding our soil moisture monitoring network. They've done a great job in terms of expanding that network, and that's going to start to answer some additional questions as well. But yeah, we are not to that kind of field level determination of drought. That said, I think that for the producers that have the wherewithal, that kind of figuring out your property and how drought affects your individual situation is probably, given the kind of what we're seeing is the trend, is probably time well spent. But there's others that can speak to that better than I can.
I could make a quick comment.
I was going to say, Bruce might be the guy.
There's a great project that's just started at the Blackfoot Community College, where they are putting up snow fences and recording what kind of extra moisture they're getting from that and how it affects the stream that's adjacent to that. So that's a project that will, I hope, produce some nice results in terms of using snow fences, specifically natural ones as well as graded ones with plastic fence. I also have put a quote from a paper when the discussion about flash drought came up, that we've learned a lot about flash drought recently. And one of the things that we've sort of suspected and seems to be coming out in the literature, in the scientific literature now, is that the increased carbon concentrations in the atmosphere are increasing a lot of leaf area development early in the season, which sets up plants to be vulnerable to drought conditions. And I think that's precisely what we're seeing in terms of development of many of the crops, trying to move into a reproductive stage when it gets really hot, and they lose too much water too fast is what it amounts to, because of all that increased carbon dioxide that's available to effectively fertilize the atmosphere, and therefore they grow a lot more than they used to early in the season. We have some research, in fact, that we're about ready to submit for publication that's looked specifically at sort of the mechanisms involved in alfalfa and wheat on that. So,
and I think that's a great point. I mean, part of it is if you look at our frost-free days, and you look at basically what has become, we've extended our growing season. And so that we're getting ET, we're getting evapotranspiration that's affecting our soil moisture profile for a much longer period of the season. And so that soil moisture, that means that soil moisture that we're not holding and carrying for use in the following season. And so, you know, it's what straws on the camel's back or death by 1,000 cuts, however you want to describe it. But there's a lot of these interrelated pieces that are all having an impact on our situation.
Yeah, and as Casey points out, we're also getting freakish cold events, so we don't really have a healthy longer growing season, just one that makes the plants more vulnerable, at least in some cases. I wonder, in the context of this discussion and your comments earlier about not fully robust monitoring systems, maybe this is an opportunity for engaging some of the citizen science things that are already happening in Montana. There's an adventure science group, but right now I see a pretty big gap between rural and urban Montana's perception of the reality of our soil moisture deficit. Around Bozeman, people have just had a grand old summer with a lot of sunny weather in some settings. And maybe engaging some citizen science in the rural landscape would help bridge that gap, as well as fill some monitoring holes.
Yeah, and that's certainly with our drought impacts reporter, that's certainly part of what we're trying to get at, is where people can, you know, kind of report conditions where they are. You know, I think that the National Weather Service with their co-op program starts to get at some of that. And yeah, I mean, you know, part of it is that I don't know that we have that we have prioritized this effort to the extent we can, and that we just don't have the bodies to get this done. Certainly, you know, as you see that we've, if anything, we keep losing. The National Weather Service keeps losing weather stations when we really need more. And so I do think that part of this is that we've got our leaders need to hear that we need to invest in more monitoring, and that's how we're going to get a better handle on what conditions are and what's working where.
Okay, I guess that's a task for everyone to participate. And thank you so much, Michael, for your time. And I hope we have a continued dialogue. And if you ever would like to reach out to us again, I know we would welcome it. So thank you.
Yeah, and please, and go to our drought plan web portal. You know, you can get on our listserv there that will keep you informed of what's going on and when we're having events and meetings. And we really do want to engage and make this a conversation with all of you on how best to put together a plan. And really, and part of that is developing some goals that then in the coming years we can use, and we can leverage those goals to get more program funding for different efforts. I really think that you know, getting your voices heard is an important part of this process. But I really thank you for having me today. I've got to jump off and actually get on another meeting, but it's been yeah, it's been a good conversation, and I learned a lot about grasshoppers, so that was good.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.